Minister Prince Saud Faisal, but the Americans seem to suggest that the Saudis did not inform them of the imminent return of Saleh. Anti-Saleh Yemenis accuse both Riyadh and Washington of supporting the regime in Sana'a, which they consider a crucial ally in the fight against Al-Qaeda. They accuse the West of adopting double standards by supporting the pro-democracy uprising in Libya, but not in Yemen. Mohammed Bar, Aljazeera.
Former Russian President Vladimir Putin has confirmed he will run in next year's presidential election. Current President Dmitry Medvedev proposed that Putin return to the post. The announcement at the United Russia Party Congress in Moscow ends years of speculation. And the two men put on a great show of solidarity.
In recent years, a practice has been reformed by the President of the United Russia's candidates. I believe this tradition must not be broken. As proposed, the elections on December 4th should be led by the current head of state, President Dmitry Medvedev, on a television video.
Given the proposal to head the party list, get involved in party work, and our successful performance in the next election, as well as my readiness to carry out practical work in the government, I believe it would be correct if this Congress supports the candidacy of the party chairman, Vladimir Putin, for the post of president of the country.
Putin has dominated modern Russian politics. He was president from 2000 to 2008, but he's been criticized for making his country a more autocratic place. But many Russians feel he is the only man to lead such a large country. Peter Sharp looks at what makes Putin so unusual.
Never knowingly undersold, the Vladimir Putin publicity juggernaut does not tire of reminding the Russian people that this is a leader to be proud of. The hard man of international politics will be 59 next month. The former KGB officer and judo black belt, whose buffed-up image is regularly captured in ever more frequent macho photo shoots. Here, a bare-chested medical exam on national television, a none-too-subtle message to the electorate that here's a politician with the stamina and the vigor to become president again. His timing is flawless, stealing headlines, riding with the night wolves. Russia's Prime Minister astride a Harley-Davidson the day President Obama came to town. And for the Russian electorate, it's all a refreshing change from the often drunk Boris Yeltsin, his predecessor who died 4 years ago. His booze-fueled antics prompted embarrassment back home. Putin's plan to return to the presidency welcomed by some voters.
I'm in complete agreement with Putin becoming president. He's a very good, wise person. With him, Russia will be better.
And he could be leading the people for some time. Under constitutional changes, the new presidential term will be 6 years instead of 4, putting Putin, if he wins, in a position of unchallengeable power. Peter Sharp, Aljazeera.
To talk about Putin's announcement further, I'm joined by Donald Jensen. He served as U.S. diplomat in Moscow and was a member of the first U.S. team to inspect Soviet missile bases back in 1988. He is now a senior fellow at the Center for Transatlantic Relations. He joins me from Washington. Donald, good to speak with you. First of all, we'll get to some more serious matters in a second here, but what's with all of the photo ops of Putin with no shirt on? What's the message in all of that?
The message is, I think, as your profile correctly portrayed, a man who's vigorous, still strong, still macho. And I think that reflects well with a lot of Russian voters. I might add a little bit narcissistic as well, but that's for the Russian electorate to decide. But Russians, so far in their modern political history, prefer that kind of vigorous leader. And as you correctly point out, when Yeltsin became something of a buffoon, his support plummeted quickly.
Okay, so will Putin return to the presidency even more powerful than when he left? And what will that mean for Russia? Look, do I have the figures right here? He could rule Russia until 2024?
He could. That's not saying he will.
Yeah.
What you're seeing here is, in many ways, a very cynical passing of the presidency back and forth between the boss and one of his assistants, and then back to the boss. And that, of course, undermines constitutionalism and the rule of law in Russia. But he was never really away from the scene. This really puts an end to the illusion of the tandem being sort of a two-headed source of separate powers. Medvedev in almost every major issue agreed with Putin. Putin was the ultimate boss, and in many ways, he's merely formalizing or being more public about a role that he has been in the shadows, but nonetheless very powerful in the last 4 or 5 years.
And Donald, when Putin left power, he was at odds with the West over the building of a European missile defense system. Do you expect that that issue will get hot again?
I think there is not a good prospect anytime soon of agreement. But I think what this does, especially here in Washington, is dispel the illusion that Medvedev is somehow a different power center or a guy who could emerge on top. Now it's more clear, it's easier. They have to deal with Putin. I think in many ways Putin is on board with the so-called reset, which is a better relationship with the United States, because Russia primarily needs economic and especially technological assistance if they are to modernize in the way that both Medvedev and Putin have said that they should.
Have you been struck by what looks to be Russia's weak hand in the Middle East?
Very much so. Russia, and I would include both Putin and Medvedev on this, Russia was caught off guard by the Libyan developments. Russia abstained, and as you know, better than most people, the Libyan opposition has expressed openly their dissatisfaction with Russia's willingness to get involved. And turning to Syria, Russia has refused to go along with even any UN resolution helping the Syrian insurgents. In fact, they said they would veto it. So Russia, in many ways, is catching up and not really in tune with some of the social turmoil and developments on the ground.
Donald Jensen is a senior fellow at the Center for Transatlantic Relations, joining us from Washington. Donald, good to speak with you. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Turkey's Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan says it is only a matter of time before Syrian President Bashar is ousted by his own people. The European Union imposed more economic sanctions on the country on Saturday. At home, demonstrations continue. We can't independently verify this video, but it's said to show a protest in the western city of Homs. Activists say the total death toll since the crackdown began has now risen to 3,000. Just over half of voters in Bahrain have been to the polls in parliamentary elections, according to state television. That is lower than expected and comes despite a boycott by the country's opposition. Protesters tried to march from the Shia enclave to the center of the capital, Manama, in response to the election, but security forces fired on them, leading to clashes. The opposition called the vote Fake Democracy in Action. 18 seats needed to be filled after opposition MPs stepped down in protest earlier this year. The head of the Swiss bank, UBS, has resigned over the company's $2.3 billion rogue trading loss. Oswald Grubel says it was his duty to resume responsibility for the loss, to assume responsibility for the loss. London-based trader is facing fraud charges over the incident. The International Monetary Fund has called on the developed world to act decisively to tackle the ongoing economic crisis. Over at the Dolgett now in Washington for more from the IMF's semi-annual meeting.
Tony, thanks very much. Finance ministers and heads of central banks were in Washington amid a steep drop in global markets. The United States and China are urging European leaders to act now to stave off the debt crisis. Tom Ackerman has more.
If the delegates of the International Monetary Fund's 154 member countries needed any reminder of the stakes at hand, they got it from the world's shrinking financial markets last week. Even gold and silver, traditional last-ditch havens for investors, suffering price drops in the rush to hoard cash. The IMF, the world's biggest lender of last resort, responded with a pledge to do its part to avert a meltdown.
We will do what it takes to prevent an escalation of the crisis, escalation of the financial crisis that we face in the weeks and months to come, and that we will also do what it takes to avoid the prospect of a of stagnation in the advanced economies.
But the fund demanded that the Eurozone countries fulfill the bold measures its leaders laid out in July, beefing up its rescue fund to its full $600 billion potential from its current $400 billion, and guaranteeing another round of relief to prevent Greece from defaulting.
And it's clearly important that commitments that have been made be delivered upon. So there was a total agreement within the membership today that was the course implement commitments that have been made.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner echoed that line. He urged the European governments to join with the European Central Bank by creating what he called a firewall against further contagion. The EU economics minister assured the IMF that all 17 Eurozone countries will have ratified the rescue package within the next month. But so far, only 1/3 of the Eurobloc membership has done so. A test of that pledge will come next week when German Chancellor Angela Merkel puts the crisis measure up for a vote in her parliament. German business groups have warned that if Merkel's own party abandons her, the EU and its common currency will face incalculable consequences, not just in Europe, but in markets around the globe. Tom Ackerman, Aljazeera, Washington.
Well, the International Monetary Fund, the United States and Europe think spending cuts are the way to go to revive economies. Some South American nations have done the opposite by expending their way to growth. That includes Argentina, which defaulted on its $100 billion debt in 2002. It devalued its currency and began focusing on exports like soybeans. The result, IMF data indicates Argentina's GDP is rising 8% this year. That's one of the highest rates in the world. Argentina repaid its IMF loan in 2006 while blaming the lender's initial conditions for contributing to the default. While other countries cut back, Argentinians get the highest minimum wages in Latin America. The government also heavily subsidizes energy and transportation. But there are concerns about inflation, which the government says is 9.8%. However, many economists think the real figure is much higher. Well, joining me from New York is Richard Wolff. He's Professor of Economics Emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Thank you very much for being with us. So is this the way to go? Should economies that are in an economic mess do what Argentina is doing?
Well, I think there's two ways to go. The Europeans and the United States pursue what we used to call trickle-down economics. You pour money at the big banks, the insurance companies, the corporations, the stock market, and you hope that it trickles down to the mass of people and reignites economic well-being. That hasn't worked, by the way. It hasn't worked in Europe, it hasn't worked in the United States. The Latin Americans, led by Argentina, are doing what we might call trickle-up. You help the people at the bottom, millions of people with rising minimum wages, spending on all kinds of basic welfare support, and you hope that the benefits go up, that people can buy goods and services, they can lead normal economic lives, and you get economic growth. Over the last 5 years, trickle-up has worked in Latin America much better than trickle-down in the United States and Europe.
So why would the United States think about trying something like that? I mean, presumably it might help in getting President Obama out of his, jobs nightmare.
Well, it's a mystery to many of us, because if you think back to the last time we had a crisis like this in the United States, the 1930s, the president at that time, Roosevelt, in the middle of the collapse, basically decided to do what Argentina is doing. He hired 11 million people between 1934 and 1941. He created the Social Security system, a massive welfare program, unemployment insurance, and so on. And between 1933 and 1937, the American economy had a comeback, not all the way, but a real improvement. And one thing that he said for bottom-up, trickle-up economics is that it helps millions of people weather the economic crisis. That is not being done in the United States and Europe. It threatens our economy, and it threatens the re-election of President Obama.
So why do you think it's so difficult then to challenge the received wisdom? Is it ideological?
I think it's mainly ideological. I think we've become used, at least here in the United States, to a kind of right-wing politics that has become the norm, in which you help big business, you help the banks, you help the folks at the top. Any attempt to tax them, which is what Roosevelt did, to create bottom-up economics, is resisted with a kind of religious fervor that many of us are beginning to think is going to produce another Great Depression, because there is no political will to try an alternative program like Argentina's, now that our trickle-down has clearly failed.
All right, Richard Wolff in New York, thanks very much for talking with us. While the IMF is concerned with protecting the world's biggest banks and many others, it's the banks that are the problem, and dozens of people have been arrested in New York as police shut down a protest against Wall Street financial firms. Organizers of the Occupy Wall Street protest are angry at government bank bailouts. Barbara Benitez has more. Scuffles in New York between the police and demonstrators calling themselves Occupy Wall Street appeared on YouTube as activists tweeted that dozens of people had been arrested. The group is using social media to call for peaceful protests against what they describe as corporate greed in America.
I've been here on and off since Saturday, and I'm going to be here as long as it takes.
They have been camping out for the past week at Trinity Place, some 300 meters from Wall Street, and they say they were blocked by police from reaching their targeted goals. The group had hoped to turn the sit-in into an American version of Tahrir Square, a reference to the largely peaceful uprising in Egypt before they say the police cracked down on them. Eyewitnesses tweeted that arrests happened as participants were marching towards the United Nations building where the UN General Assembly is being held. But so far, exact numbers are unconfirmed. Occupy Wall Street organizers say they intend to continue their so-called occupation for change indefinitely. Barbara Benitez, Aljazeera. Two Americans released from a prison in Iran have spoken to reporters just before boarding a plane in Oman back to the United States. Josh Fatal and Shane Bowers spent more than 2 years in jail on spying charges. The men say that they were merely hiking near Iraq's border with Iran. They were freed earlier this month on $1 million bail deal and are due back in the United States on Sunday.
Just hours after we left prison, we were able to swim in calm waters in the Gulf. We stayed up all night with our loved ones and watched the most beautiful sunset we've ever seen.
Getting off the plane that brought us here 3 days ago was the most incredible experience for our lives.
And I'll have more from the Americans a little later on in the broadcast, including... As far as Florida's concerned, he's the best Republican to challenge President Obama for the White House. More on outsider Herman Cain's shock straw poll victory coming up.
Doctor, thank you. Caught out by poachers, Sri Lanka says more than $50 million of fish are being lost each year, and they're blaming the Indians. We'll have a report in Colombo. Plus, they are calling him the ketchup killer. We will tell you how a Brazilian hitman faked his lover's death. And in sports, a special milestone for New Zealand's Richie McCall, but is there a happy ending to his 100th match for the All Blacks? So Robin will be here with more.
Once again, we've got temperatures going in the wrong direction across the Arabian Peninsula at the moment. Highs in Doha around 39 degrees on Sunday, so down a touch on recent values. But as we go on into Monday, looking at highs of around 43 degrees, so we will warm up once again. Always a chance of the odd shower into southern sections of the Red Sea, but for the most part, more in a way, very warm sunshine, which stretches its way across Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and western parts of India. For Western India, it's still pretty disturbed. Very disturbed once again. More flooding rain will continue across the northeast of India, through Orissa, pushing up into West Bengal and also into Bangladesh. Further flooding possibilities here. For Sri Lanka, I think the northern parts of the country might just see some showers, but elsewhere staying largely dry. Staying largely dry too across much of southern Africa, but towards the central belt we have got some sharp showers. Those showers just extending their way through Madagascar, Mozambique and also into Tanzania, so expect to see some rather lively showers here. Lively showers still continuing too into eastern parts of Brazil, but they are moving away from Rio, so improving here. Temperatures at around 22 Celsius. Fine and dry for Buenos Aires at around 22 degrees. Santiago is also set fair with a top temperature of 25.
On Counting the Cost, can the BRICS access mortar for Europe's shaky house? We look at what countries like Brazil, Russia, India and China could possibly gain from Europe's debt crisis. Plus headline interviews with the head of Citibank Thailand and the managing director of the World Bank, counting the costs at this time on Aljazeera.